Are you going to be a mentor for the first time? I know that we're approaching the end of May, which means that high schools and undergraduate colleges are going to be out for the summer. That also means that the people who normally go to those things are going to be coming out and doing research for the first time in research institutes, and therefore graduate students or postdocs are probably going to be mentoring for their first experience. And so I'd like to take this opportunity to thank my previous summer student who contacted me last week for advice on mentoring for the first time. And that led to this video because I thought, ooh, if Adam needs help, so does everyone else. So thank you, Adam, for giving me the idea of making this video. And so I'm going to give you some advice. I've mentored a number of students in the lab and also because I used to run a summer academy. So I've mentored in different ways. But I thought there's some key things that I would like to share with you, and hopefully it will make sure that you have a good experience mentoring and your mentee has a good experience learning from you. So hi, if you haven't seen me before, I'm Kate. I am the founder of Educated STEM. And as I said, today we're going to go through how we mentor for the first time. And so hopefully you're thinking about the ways that you have previously been mentored, what you have enjoyed, what you haven't enjoyed, and maybe you can use some of that information to broach how you are going to mentor someone else. And one of the key things for you to do is to build trust and rapport with your mentee, which means bringing your authentic self into this from the very beginning. So don't try to emulate someone else, what they've done previously for you or what you've observed. You need to take what you have enjoyed or appreciated from that experience and make it your own. And that is how you're going to build this kind of trust and rapport with your mentee, which is essential if you are going to be successful. And if you're concerned, don't worry about it. That is good. It is good to be concerned because you're already thinking about how you can be successful at this. I know a lot of people who don't necessarily stress about these, and then later on they find out that maybe they didn't do such a good job. So if you have concerns, that is a good thing at this moment in time. It means that you're considering that you want to do a good job, that you want to help your mentee. So one of the first things that I will share with you is if you watch all the way to the end, you will learn how my first mentee managed to set themselves on fire in the lab. And whilst it is a funny story, you're going to have to watch until the end. But all throughout, I will share a few stories that I have had as both a mentee and a mentor. So I hope you enjoy these little snippets. Now, one of the things that you may not have considered is that if you struggle with something or if you have messed up previously, you will absolutely go to town and overcompensate when you're teaching your mentee. So this is just something to consider. It is important that if there's a valuable lesson that they do learn it, but let's not flog a dead horse on this. So my example for this is that during my PhD, most of it was radioactive. I handled a lot of P32 during my research, and my mentor, who was Dr. Grigory Dianov, he taught everyone in the lab the first time that they handled P32 and for a number of sessions after that if he felt that it was necessary. And the reason he did this was because he himself had messed up historically. And so one of the first things he taught me was when you walk away from the bench, you have a Geiger counter and you check your hands, you check your arms, you check your body, and you check the soles of your shoes before you walk away. Because he didn't check the soles of his shoes, and he managed to trek P32 down a corridor. And so it was vital for him to make sure that none of his students did that. And if I've taught anyone to how to handle radioactivity, I have also shown them that you always check yourself before you move on. And so that was one of the things that he made sure that we learned. You also need to appreciate that how you enjoy learning, or maybe even how you prefer teaching, may be different to how your mentee likes to learn. And so, one of the first conversations you should probably have with your mentee is to try and find out how they learn best and how you can then modify your approach if the way that they learn best may be slightly different to yours, so you can really help them. And so it's a good idea to have this conversation right at the very beginning, the first day that you meet your mentee, because you would be horrified if you spent maybe the entire summer teaching them in a way that means that you are an ineffective mentor. So have that conversation right out the gate so that you can teach them in the best style. Yes, it might stretch you, but that's a good thing. You will also learn how to teach in a different way. The next step is to figure out where your mentee is currently. What do they know? So if you have someone who's in high school, they might never have learned anything about your research topic. And so you need to begin with very basic building blocks and work up from there. If you have a student who might be either in undergraduate college, depending on what year they are, they may already know a little bit about what you're doing. They may have had previous summer experience where they may have done some of the techniques that you're doing. That is wonderful, but I would just use a word of caution to make sure that they know everything. So continue to build on their knowledge all the way through. Check in, make sure that they're retaining the knowledge. Don't just assume that if someone's nodding at you, that they have understood everything. They may just be doing what they think is necessary for them. And also make sure that they're taking notes appropriately. So if you're teaching them a technique and you're saying, please remember how to do this, maybe they're taking photos, maybe they're making notes. If they say, oh, don't worry about this, I'm going to remember, then the likelihood is that they probably won't. And so I always encouraged my mentees to write down as much as necessary, just to make sure that they retained the information. And also, if there's something that you do a lot, maybe there's a particular technique that you do, maybe you can write down a beginner's guide to how to do it before they even join the lab, so that you have a document or something that you can give them and say, this is a technique that we're going to be doing a lot of. Please familiarize yourself with it, and then they can refer back to it whenever they need to. So I was the queen of Western blots. So I had a document that I could give them on day one, which explained what a Western blot did, but also, how to make the sandwich and how to run the gel and all of those good things. And then they could just refer to it if I was unavailable at that time. Now, when it comes to teaching a technique or something, then you may have experienced something like see one, do one, teach one. So that means you watch someone do it, they then watch you do it, and then you're teaching one potentially the third time you do it. And I think this is very popular when it comes to medical school and things like that. And it definitely is a way to teach. You might want to slow this down, especially if you feel that your mentee might need a little bit more help. So maybe you want to do something where they watch you do the technique. You then get them to assist you performing the technique. You then reverse it. You assist them doing the technique. And then finally, they're doing it on their own. So it takes 4 separate times before they're doing it on their own. And you might want to just judge your mentee's ability before you do this. Maybe they can do the see one, do one, teach one. So literally the second time they're doing it themselves. So again, you're going to have to judge that on your mentee, but also maybe on their comfort level. Maybe they don't want to do things quite that quickly. So you might want to kind of leave the training wheels on for a little bit longer. And really, it involves some discussion with your trainee to find out what they're comfortable with. Now, the key thing about a good mentor-mentee relationship absolutely comes down to communication. And this comes in different areas. So the first thing is you need to set clear expectations and goals, and these may change. And so you should articulate that to your mentee. But there is nothing more frustrating for either of you if there is a problem when it comes to communication. So if your mentee doesn't understand what you expect and how they can please you, what makes you successful in your eyes, if they can't do that, then they will get very frustrated and upset. Likewise, you may think that you have explained this. Absolutely. There's no way to misconstrue what you have said. However, there probably is. And so make sure that you don't get annoyed when they're not hitting your expectations because you did not explain yourself appropriately. Another thing to do with communication is providing feedback, and that needs to be in a timely manner. So if you see something that they're doing wrong or something that could be improved, tell them at the time. Hopefully there won't be people around to hear you give this feedback, but make sure that you give it at the time, because later on they may be confused about what you mean, or they might say, oh, I didn't do that. So if you correct them at the time, then there's no misunderstanding and you can get them doing what is appropriate. Likewise, if they're doing something amazing and it's great, you can then praise them and kind of build up their confidence at the time. And so both of those are important to make sure that your mentee knows how to do a good job when they're doing a good job, and it will also hopefully help their enthusiasm and allow them to be more excited about the project and maybe research in general. And so giving feedback or giving praise may feel uncomfortable the first couple of times you do it, but hopefully the more you do it, the more you'll get into your kind of mentoring groove and the more natural it will feel. Then it might be really important for them to know when they can't disturb you. So maybe you're doing a particular experiment which you absolutely need to concentrate on, or you're doing some kind of analysis. And so, you're really concentrating. If they were to disturb you at this moment in time, it would, throw your concentration and it would be very hard to come back into it. They need to know when those points are. So maybe there is a very obvious way to signal it. You're listening with headphones in or something. So they know, okay, right now I really shouldn't interrupt unless the lab is on fire or something terrible is going on. But also you could just say, for the next half an hour I'm doing this, please, unless it's absolutely urgent, everything can basically wait whilst I just do this, because you don't want to get frustrated and potentially snap at them that you're busy, because that is going to start to undo any of that trust or rapport that you have already built. Whereas if you set the expectation, I'm really busy right now, I just need to concentrate for the next 30 minutes to an hour, however long, come find me after that time frame and I will be able to help you. Yeah, that would be very helpful. Something that I think a lot of the older generation may have struggled with. I know that I have definitely asked questions before and I feel that I have been fobbed off. But if someone asks you a question and either you can't think of the answer or you honestly never knew the answer to know it in the first place, just let them know that. Everyone, you can't know everything. So that's not a big deal. And I think it would definitely help those coming up through to know that you can be humble and say, actually, I don't know the answer, but I will find it out for you and I will let you know. So give me a moment and I will figure it out. I think that definitely helps, because a lot of the time you're looking up at, your PI or someone and you think, oh my gosh, they know absolutely everything. And they don't. They can't, right? They might be an amazing scientist in this one particular area, but this isn't a James Bond film where an astrophysicist then manages to come over here and solve a biochemical question. Those are very different fields and it just doesn't happen. And so I think that don't potentiate the myth that you know everything, because we don't. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it will definitely help, and it will absolutely build that trust when they know that you've been honest. Then there needs to be some professional boundaries, right, with your mentor and mentee. So I know that when I was first mentored, it was in America. I'd come to the States to do a year of research as part of my undergraduate degree. And the person who was mentoring me was She was fairly strict. There was a decent amount of judgment if she felt that I had done something that she didn't agree with. And this wasn't necessarily in the lab. It could have been what I spent my weekend doing. But she let me know when I had fallen short of what she had expected, usually when it came to my personal life. And so when I became a mentor, I was like, okay, I didn't like that. I am going to be much more approachable, much friendlier with my mentee. And I think I went a little bit too far on the other direction, because the first mentee that I had, when I asked her to do things later on, she wouldn't necessarily think that I was being serious, or she just, would say, no, you do it. And it's like, well, that's not quite what this is. It's supposed to be learning from me, and I'm asking you to do something. So can we do it? So remember to have these kind of boundaries. These are not going to be your best friends. It is absolutely lovely if you do make a relationship with your mentee and you can keep in contact with them over the years and see their successes. That is lovely. But make sure that, they do know this is a mentee-mentor relationship, so that you don't come unstuck like I did. And I will explain very soon how that relationship, or how that led to the issue where she set herself on fire. So it's good to know that if you're going to be a successful mentor, it is going to be really time consuming. So don't think now, maybe you work 9 to 5, you probably don't. But if that's your time in the lab, don't assume that having these mentees, even if it's just one, you'll be leaving at 5 o'clock and getting the same amount of work done, because that just isn't feasible. And so that is okay, right? You need to check in with your mentee at the beginning of the day. You need to have a meeting and discuss what they're doing for the day. Are they following you? Are they doing something independently? If they have learned that over a period of time, then you're going to be checking in with them. Is everything going okay? Do you need any help? Have you got all of the materials that you need? And then before they go home at the end of the day, how did it go? Did anything surprise you? What did you learn? Is there anything that you'd be doing differently the next time? And maybe from the answers, you will then change how you're going to do something in the following days or weeks. So this is great. This is how you keep open communication, and it will definitely help you as a mentor. But it will take time. It will add on significant time to your day. And especially if they're doing something for the first time, then it will take longer. It will then take longer in your day, because presumably you'll be around them, making sure that everything is going well. And so sometimes that goes completely awry. I will say I had a mentee who I got told would be my star. She would be amazing. And towards the end of the summer, because everything I did at that time was also radioactive. It was a different radiation. It was not P32, but she had wanted to work with it. That was the whole point of her coming for the summer. And my PI basically said, she needs to do it. This is going to be the week that she does it. And even though I'd said, I don't think she's ready for this experiment, bearing in mind, these experiments took hours. And because of the type of radiation, you had to work in a little lead castle, and there was shielding and all sorts of things. So you were in a very odd position, because you had to kind of work down here. So just imagine holding your arms like this for hours on end. Your shoulders, everything gets tight. But I had to let her do it. And she'd been doing it for a while, but then she said that she was in so much discomfort, she could not complete the experiment. And I was in a different hood doing my own version of the experiment. And the amount of money that was in there, you had the radioactivity, you had the cell lines, you had the drugs that were going on the cells, you had everything in there. I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to finish her experiment, because I can't waste all of those reagents and all of those things. And so I was there into the late evening, making sure that my experiment was completed, and then completing her experiment to then sit in an incubator for a couple of weeks whilst the clonogenic assay was just doing its thing. And so it's very hard when you have that moment, because I had been right. She wasn't ready to do that experiment. And the next day she came in and pretended it hadn't happened and everything was just dandy. And it was challenging. And I had to give her grace, because it wasn't her fault that, she wasn't ready to spend hours like this. But at the same time, I had been right. She was not ready for that sort of experiment. So if someone does something wrong, or they do something which then takes up an awful lot of your time as you correct it, you need to show them grace. Hopefully somebody has done that for you in the past, and you can pay that forward. I will say that probably my example of that was again during my PhD. I used to have to stab a needle through a plastic tube which contained radioactive DNA, and I managed to perforate both sides. So you're only supposed to go in through one side, and then you keep the needle in, and you collect little radioactive drops of the DNA, so that you can then get the correct size DNA that was required. But I'd managed to puncture both sides, and because of that, I ended up basically pulling the needle back out, and I had to put my fingers on both sides of the tube. Otherwise, P32 labeled DNA would start, falling out of the tube and spraying everywhere. And so I distinctly remember shouting for my mentor at the time, who was Sarah. And eventually someone noticed that I was screaming my head off. It might have only been a minute. It felt an awful lot longer. And she came in and she chuckled at my predicament. And then once she'd, double gloved and got ready to help me, we managed to finish that portion of the experiment. The rest of the experiment went fine, and she saved the day. But she didn't berate me. She just kind of went, "Oh, you silly goose! You weren't supposed to push that hard." And believe you me, I never did again. But that was my whoopsie moment, and that could have been very expensive. I could have wasted all of those reagents, and she showed me grace. We figured it out, and so I paid it forward. But that is something that you might need to do for your mentee. And hopefully you enjoy being a mentor. Finding out what they do eventually is something that's really quite lovely. It's showing my age, but I've had students who I mentored when they were in high school, and they're now surgeons, they're physicians, they have their own PhDs and are going to have their own mentees this year. Way to make me feel old, guys. But it's really lovely to find out just how pivotal their summer experiences were, and how that affected how they have moved on with their careers. Whether that's to decide that research isn't their thing, that's just as important as realizing that they love it, right? So they don't waste their time. And before I talk about my little students setting themselves on fire, I will share what my PhD supervisor told me once. So again, the wonderful Dr. Grigory Dianov. He once told me that his true legacy was in the people that he trained, not necessarily the research that he had performed. And it's true. The way he taught me definitely altered the way that I train others. And hopefully that can then be continued down the line, mentee to mentor. And so, the people that I mentored are now part of my legacy, but they also preserve his, right? Because I took some of the things that he taught me and I have paid that forward. So it's a really lovely way of making sure that the future of science or STEM or research is done well, and you can kind of help preserve that as you mentor. So, as I promised, I will explain why my first student managed to set themselves on fire. So again, if you manage to get through your entire summer experience and your mentee has not set themselves on fire, you're doing better than I did. And so I have a healthy fear of Bunsen burners and fire in general. And so if I was streaking plates with bacteria, I would kind of psych myself up and I would work, obviously quite close to the flame so that we didn't get any infections on the plates. But I was very specific, and anyone watching me, and especially if you knew that I had this fear of fire, they thought it was hysterical and they would kind of joke about it all the time. So my student, who was in high school at the time, thought this was the funniest thing ever. And so when it was her turn to streak the plates, and I don't think it was her first time doing it, but she definitely was a little cocky. She'd done it before, and she wanted to make the point to me that I was being ridiculous with this fear. So as she was doing it, she managed to set her gloves on fire. And I just stood in absolute horror on the opposite side of the lab. I clearly remember it. I wasn't anywhere near her because we'd done it before. I assumed she had it, even though she was messing around. And so luckily, the lab manager was very close to her. And she just said, kind of take your gloves off, throw them into the sink, and then we, put her hands underwater. And then afterwards she said, whoops, okay, maybe you do have a point. Because sometimes people's fears are valid. You can set yourself on fire if you're working next to a flame, and she proved it. But I have never been more worried or concerned about a mentee since. But that was also because she was trying to prove me wrong and make her own statement. And I think she did. So again, if you manage to get out of your summer experience and your mentee hasn't been harmed, doesn't set themselves on fire, perfect. I think you're winning. Okay, so I would be interested to know if I have missed anything. Is there something that you would add to my list? Please pop them in the comments. If it is your first time, let me know how it went. Did you follow the advice? What did you learn? How did your mentee react to any of the advice that I have given you? I look forward to hearing from you, and I hope this video helps. Please, again, you can go and look at the blog on educatedstem.com. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.